Good morning, everyone. I'm sure we'll have some people continue to log on over the next few minutes, but we will go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to this web presentation on best practices for reading instruction in the virtual classroom. My name is Mike Gardner. I'm an account executive for Reading Horizons in the Mid-South. We're excited that there's been so much interest on this topic, and we hope to be able to assist you through this challenging time and provide some useful information today. Because we're learning together, at certain points we'll ask for your feedback during this presentation. And you can provide that through the question and answer section that you'll see at the bottom center of your screen. We hope to compile this feedback and share that information with you. We will be recording this presentation, and tomorrow we'll provide you with a link to access that recording as a reference and to share with your colleagues as well. So this morning, I'm excited to introduce to you our speaker, Chantel Barrett Blake. Chantel has a bachelor's in English teaching and a master's in education with a reading science concentration and dyslexia certification. She has both advanced training and certification in Orton Gillingham from her International Dyslexia Association accredited graduate program. She is also letters and SURI trained and certified. Chantel is a mother of 3 children, one of whom has dyslexia and dysgraphia, which was the catalyst for her graduate work and her professional path. Chantel is currently the lead professional development and dyslexia specialist for Reading Horizons. She's a national presenter and a consultant on the science of reading and dyslexia. She is passionate about raising awareness about the importance of effective reading instruction for every student, especially those with dyslexia. So I will now pass the virtual microphone to Chantel.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you today and share this information that's so critical for us at this time as we pivot quickly and navigate this new arena that we're in. And that's one of the things that we wanted to be able to do as we partner with educators across the nation. Most of us in curriculum and as trainers, we are educators ourselves. So we know the needs, we know the stress that comes with that, and this whole new arena now. We want to be able to come in and provide resources and support for you. And that's our purpose and goal for this meeting today, is to provide information and resources to help you facilitate evidence-based reading instruction virtually. Before we start that, we want to start with a poll very quickly, because we're talking about with virtual instruction, it can come in a variety of ways. We can do it live in that moment where we're using like a Zoom platform and we're engaging with our students in real time, or we can pre-record lessons or information and send that to our students, or we can do an online software approach. And we'd like to know and get a little bit more information about what you're doing. So if you just want to, we're going to pull up this poll and have you enter that information in. Going to make sure that's pulling up. I can't see it yet, so David, there it is. Now I see it. Okay, so if you guys will click on that, what does your virtual classroom look like? And we'll share that information. As we talk with educators all over the nation, a lot of it's a combination of those options. Some of it's been just, we've had to turn it around so quickly. What do we have on hand? What can we use? So we'll see kind of what, as I've done this with in other areas across the nation, there's been more of a combination. So I'll be interested to see where it lands for you. So once you put in that information, then we'll share that. And maybe you're still trying to figure it out, and that's okay too. We're all kind of at different places. Okay. We're able to share those results now? See what we have. I'm curious to see if you're doing more live or recorded, more software. And there's the other issue of, students who don't have digital access. And I am going to talk about some options for that at the end, because that's another challenge that we're facing as far as equity and all of those pieces right now as we're trying to meet the needs of our students. Okay, so it's not showing on my, oh good, I can see it here. Okay, yep, combination of those options. So that's what we're seeing is a combination of those options. That seems pretty consistent. This group's doing a little bit more, the last group I did more software. So this is really cool to see you're doing more live, more recorded. Very cool, very cool. We're going to talk about all those options and how we're going to combine those and what that can look like to take our virtual class for our traditional classroom into this virtual setting. So I have 3 main objectives that I want to cover with you today. Just talk about a successful virtual classroom in general and provide 4 general tips to help just guide that regardless of what you're teaching. And then I want to kind of zoom in a little bit more and go into effective virtual reading instruction in this arena and provide some evidence-based guidelines for that. And then finally, to walk through just a few resources for you and what we're offering. And we'll share what we're offering through the end of the school year to support educators across the nation during this time. And I'll show those things. We have a ton of free resources for you right now to be available to help you do this as we go through. So let's go through our first objective and start with those 4 tips. So the first tip is set clear expectations. This is a hard one. We want to make sure, because we're still trying to figure out what those expectations are. I mean, one of the things we'll get into a little bit more is now end of year testing has gone away in most scenarios, although in a special education setting, we're still held accountable for progress monitoring. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the expectations are changing on us, right? But we still want, as educators, our students to get that information, to learn, to keep their learning going. And those expectations, we want to be clear if we're an administrator with our teachers. What does that look like? What are we expecting them to do at this time? As teachers, what are we expecting our students to do and our parents to do? And there's so many things that we're navigating around that. What parents are capable of doing, if they're working, if the student's able to log on, what that looks like. And you can even share some of the expectations that you have right now in the chat, and we can see what everyone's expecting and share that information as well. We want to have, one of the key things is to have realistic expectations at this time. There's a lot of factors, and we're going to break this down a little bit within this tip. So one of the things that those in the virtual arena who do a ton of training and education within virtual instruction and training is one of the mistakes that they find that many professionals make is when we try to just 100% recreate the in-person experience. It's going to be different. We need to think outside of the classroom box. So we want to mirror what we're doing as much, but we need to be willing to think in a different way about how we're going to translate that information, provide that information for students, and different ways for them to get that information. So that's going to be important to think about. What do we have that can be repurposed at this time? Is it something that, so there's kind of a 2-step checklist that we do. So do we have those options? Do we have like software and things that can easily be adapted in this setting? Or are we having to recreate the wheel? And so that's something to be mindful of at this time, because we know that this is not going away anytime soon. It's likely going to change how we're interacting with students for a long time, and that can be a positive. I know this is pushing a lot of us to grow and expand in ways in a really time-sensitive fashion that we haven't had to, but it can be really powerful if we can use what we're learning here and what we're creating to make a more engaging and accessible opportunity for our students to learn. So look at what we have in place, because now we've kind of done that knee-jerk reaction of just getting information to our students, and now we're able to kind of pause and slow down a little bit now to start to think, okay, so what do we have that's working? And going forward, if this were to happen again, or if we want to change what we're doing, is what we have in place adaptable? Can it be repurposed? Is it designed to be able to meet the needs in a setting like we find ourselves now? But the first thing we need to do as we're adapting to this is not having the expectation that it's going to just translate 100% like it would from the traditional classroom. We want to think outside that classroom box. And I'll show some options about how to do that and what that can look like specifically in a little bit. Now let's go to the next one, drop the perceived difficulty. So this is a really powerful piece to talk about in what we're doing, because to have our teachers and for us as teachers to be motivated to do this, and our students and parents to be motivated, if it's overly complex, we're going to disengage. We know that. We see that's the biggest issue we're seeing right now with parents. They're really overwhelmed if they've got more than one kid, lots of variety of, or lots of platforms that are being used, lots of directions. It's just they're getting overwhelmed. And when we get overwhelmed, when that perceived difficulty gets really high, we shut down. It's one of the most fascinating connections for me, actually, with reading outcomes. Motivation, the correlation between motivation and reading outcomes. It is so highly correlated in the data, and so much so that that's what I did my thesis on, because I was so intrigued by the fact that, we can have a fantastic program or we can be doing great strategies in our classroom. How come students sometimes just still are not motivated to engage? And I wanted to know that, because if we can combine and bring in the motivation awareness, then and address those skills as well, then what we're doing from an instructional end is going to be more effective. And so they found about 8 to 11 dimensions of motivation that are correlated to reading outcomes, and honestly, successful outcomes in general. One of the most highly correlated that was identified in the research was the undermining motivation of perceived difficulty. When something is overly complex, we're demotivated to engage with it. So it's important for us, as we're evaluating what platforms are we using, how are we sending this information to students, how can I drop the perceived difficulty? If the platform's overly complex, we may need to reevaluate. We want it to be simple and easy to use. I'm going to share a couple of examples of ones that I think are really easy to use in a little bit as we get more specific. So be mindful of that perceived difficulty. Everything should be as simple as possible. Then the next point that I want to talk about is giving more options in this time. Part of that's too, if we can give more options, then if one feels overly complex for a student, because sometimes it's about perception of that individual student, that then they have more options to gather and to obtain that information, to learn that information. In the virtual arena, they're saying the more options, the better, which is another thing to think about. What are we using? Is it, allowing us, is whatever curriculum we're using, is it allowing us to go from recorded lessons with tools to do that to software for our students to engage with? If there's a variety of ways for them to get that information, they're more likely to engage and meet the expectations that we have for them. Options is critical. That's another engagement factor, a motivation factor in the research, is that if students have options and have autonomy to be able to do that, they're more likely to stay motivated and engage with it. It's really hard at this time because it's like, oh, we're just trying to get this content out. So it's like, here's your one assignment. Here's one option to do that. And that's okay right now. This is important for us to remember that, perfect is the enemy to good. And right now it's okay that things are not, we're putting it out there, not perfectly. We've all been stressed about it. We talked about it as educators across the nation, those in Reading Horizons, but sometimes it's just about getting that content out there. And then as we kind of get our bearings and get our feet under us, we can start to provide more options and expand. And we're thinking about options. Think about, if you're an elementary teacher, think about centers. So that center time, it's about giving a variety of ways for them to do that independent and guided practice, to be able to have variety within that of transfer of those skills. And we want to keep that as much as possible. It's going to look different, remember, outside that classroom box, but we still want to provide those options. I'm going to show you some examples of that as well. The next one, be willing to adapt. So as we're navigating this and we're trying different things, it's important for us to be mindful of the fact that we may do something that doesn't work very well. And to just be willing to go, you know what, hey, that didn't work. I'm going to adapt and change that. And be willing to do that, because this is kind of we're sort of building the plane as we're flying it right now. And so to be willing to change if things don't work, rather than getting hung on to, oh, I spent all this time on this and it's not working, to just let that go, readjust and adapt. That's a critical thing as we talk with educators and those in the virtual arena. That's going to be important for us to find that success in the virtual classroom that we're looking for, to be able to adapt and adjust accordingly based on our student and parent response. The last part of this tip is consistent communication. This is going to be important, and we're figuring this out as better as time goes on. But the students really still need to hear from us. What's interesting about this time is, thank heavens that we have the digital resources that we do during this unique time to be able to still provide instruction and support for students. But this has been the problem with technology for a long time. It keeps us connected with more people than ever, and yet in some weird way is more isolated. And especially during this time, we all feel incredibly isolated. And so one of the benefits and powerful things that they're finding is for the students to hear their teacher's voice, to see them live, to see their face as consistent as possible, to keep some of that normalcy is really helpful for students to hear those expectations from you verbally, to provide that support. We're going to talk about some different ways to do that as well. But that consistent communication daily, whether you're sending them a recorded message, where you're jumping live with them if possible, as consistent as we can be is beneficial for our students, especially when we're talking about relaying those expectations and helping them meet those expectations. That's one of the ways that we can do that. So let's look at tip 2. Set challenging but attainable goals. This is interesting during this time because we get so mired in the day-to-day, we become kind of microscopic in our vision where we're focused on the day-to-day tasks that we're having students do. Just get this assignment done, almost to sort of keep them busy. We're really focused on just get the lesson done, but we need to be able to come back out and what we call zoom out to the bigger picture. One of the other correlations between motivation and reading outcomes and outcomes in general is value and purpose. So why is this important to me? What's the value here for me? And this has definitely become even more challenging right now because with certain things going away that may be motivating for students as to why they find the value, end of year testing, their grades, all of those things are still a little bit up in the air right now. And so a lot of students are like, I don't even want to log on. Like, why should I log on, right? And so we want to be able to help them get to still what the bigger purpose is, what that bigger picture is. Why are we doing that? There's a strategy in goal setting called zooming out and zooming in. I'm going to give you a couple of phrases that are profound. They've been profound for me personally with the students and educators that I work with as well. So when we're creating assignment, I'm going to talk about from an assignment level, and then I'm going to talk a little bit bigger to keep the students engaged. So we're talking about an assignment that we're giving. We can get mired and just keep them busy, get them something, right? We want to do what we call zoom out and ask the question, for what purpose? For what purpose am I doing this assignment? What's my purpose here? What's my overall goal in this assignment? And kind of setting up bigger long-term goals. And then we're going to zoom in just a minute, talk about how we're going to do that. But for what purpose? And this goes back to also helping our students find, for what purpose are they doing this? Connect with them, so why do you want to stay engaged with this? Why is it important for you? Let's talk about this. What's going to happen to the learning for you? Will that mean next year will be harder? Will it mean you have to do more catch up? If they're older students, we want you to be able to still get into the job and be able to do those things as well. That's going to be important. So hang on just a second. I may have just lost you. Can you guys still see my screen? Everyone good? Okay. It looks like I just lost you for a second. Okay, so we want to talk about, okay, we're good. Everyone can see me in the chat? You're good and see my screen still? Okay. Okay, so that's important to connect back with them to be able to almost kind of help redefine their purpose of why they should engage. Help those older students. We still want to be able to make sure that you can maintain that learning you're going to need for those assessments if you want to go to college or to be able to get that job that you want. So zooming back out and saying, for what purpose am I doing this? And as we're preparing our lessons, for what purpose? For what purpose am I doing this assignment? And then we want to zoom in and say, okay, so how specifically am I going to do this? So that helps us dive into those details. So how am I going to meet that purpose that I have for my students? And that helps guide a little better as we're planning these lessons and putting that out. So what are our goals based on our expectations, right? We're going to build on that. What are the goals that I have for the students? And I want you to put in the chat some of the goals that you have right now for your virtual instruction. I'd love to hear that. We want to hear that information, and so we can help maybe see if we can support you in those goals, and just share this information with each other. Are some of your goals to just provide instruction to keep the learning going? Do you have a bigger goal in mind? So put some of the goals that you have right now, for what purpose you're doing that instruction. Maybe it's just to make sure that you're still engaging with students right now. and supporting them. So type in the chat. You can do it in the chat. You can do it in the Q&A section, some of the goals that you have, some of the purposes, and maybe specifically how you're meeting some of those goals so that we can share that. Goal setting at this time and keeping that bigger picture is going to be important so that we don't get mired in the day-to-day, which is really easy right now. We're kind of in survival mode. And so that narrows our focus a lot. And the way that we keep our head above water is to keep zooming out and keeping that big picture in mind. So let's go to tip 3, facilitate engagement. That's the big challenging one here at this time. That's hard in the classroom sometimes, right? And the younger they are, I feel like the more like it's herding cats. And the older, when I taught junior high and high school, they're dealing with so many different things. Sometimes that's really hard to connect into the value for them and maintain that engagement and keep that engagement with them. So in this setting, we're finding some new challenges. So let's break this down. This is a critical piece in the virtual instruction, in that virtual classroom. Those that work in this arena all the time have put out best practices in how to do this. So the first one, do more checks for understanding. The evidence is showing that we need to do even more checks for understanding in a virtual classroom than we do in a traditional classroom to stay engaged. So often that disconnect becomes a problem, right? Where we're providing the instruction, we send the video, and then the students are doing the independent work. They miss that guided practice we're going to talk about in a second. And so we need to do more checks for the understanding, things like asking participants to respond verbally, or raise their hand, or do the chat like this, put up emoticons, whatever would work for them with their age. And to meet those expectations, we want to make sure that we're still checking for understanding. You know, what is, so how do you prove this vowel sound? Or what is the main point that we just talked about? Getting that interaction with them and checking for understanding. Is that clear? Explain that back to me. Remember, if they can explain it back to you, that means they really understand it on a deep level and helping them become metacognitive about those skills. And that goes and connects intricately into soliciting specific and regular interaction. They said, you know, in the best practices, don't be afraid in a virtual setting to call on students, even by name, which is, we're going to have some opportunity to do that as we move through this, to be able to make sure that that interaction stays consistent with our students, even in that virtual setting. The next one is talking about, for engagement, talking about guided work breaks. So this is interesting. I was speaking with a colleague of mine who, he's a school psychologist. He works for Reading Horizons now because he used Reading Horizons in his setting with great success. And he taught in a virtual setting for a long time. We were having this discussion, and other educators that are doing this, about the schedule. We actually did a webinar last night with Dr. Selznick, and we talked about who wrote The Shutdown Learner, and talked about how important it is to try to maintain a schedule for our students. This was a webinar that was guided to parent support. And we can share that link with you if you would like after. But he talked a lot about how important it is to try to maintain that schedule. And in the research that I've done in this, and talking to those who put out best practices, that's a consistent thing. That if we can keep to the schedule as much as possible, we're going to start with, if we start with reading, then let's start with reading. If then we go to science, then go to science. The other thing is to keep those breaks. So recesses, you can even do recesses online. You could do a set scavenger hunt for your students. You know what? Okay, everyone, I want you to do a scavenger hunt, find objects. You've got 1 minute to go find any object in your house that starts with the letter B, and bring that back. You could do online Jeopardy, and we've got those resources that we can share with you via email after. But the research is showing if we can keep as much of a schedule, now it's, again, remember going back to that first point, it's not going to translate 100%. To expect students, and Dr. Selznick talked about this, and parents to do a 6-hour instructional day, it's not going to happen. So it's about getting the key points for what purpose am I doing this? How quickly can I do this? How specifically can I relay that information and have that interaction be appropriate without taking 4 hours? So being realistic about the time in our expectations, but trying to keep a consistent schedule, the evidence is showing, is very beneficial to maintain engagement and to facilitate success in this environment. One of those, especially for our younger students, is those guided work breaks. So often we're so used to more of a structure, it's really hard to do that when we're autonomous and on our own. And so as educators, that's one of the things that we can do to help us to provide some suggestions and support in that schedule, including breaks like recesses or just some brain breaks for our older students. The last one is to use breakout rooms for small groups. So this is critical to maintain engagement as well, is breakout rooms can still happen in a virtual setting. Zoom is one platform that is fantastic for that. It's super easy. You can put it in your settings, then it becomes available to you at the bottom of your screen. You can, it'll automatically assign your attendees to certain groups, to certain breakout sessions, but you can do that manually. And once you do that, then you can assign yourself to one of those breakout sessions. You can change rooms. You can also put back up, a general message to everybody that they'll see it, that'll say, come back to the main classroom in 1 minute. We'll come back together, and then you can facilitate that as well. So this is something that's really helpful to maintain the opportunity to work with those students in small group. Now, because of the navigation feature here, even though it's fairly simple and you can set that up for really young students, if they don't have a parent to help, this could be problematic, right? So this is why one of the things we want to talk about, because truly one thing that doesn't translate super well in the virtual setting from the traditional classroom is whole group instruction. That is really hard when you have all these attendees on, to see them navigate, answer questions, because it's just a little bit of a different setting, right? And so what we're finding is that small group sessions are more effective. So what's great about if you're using an approach that has a variety of options, right? Going back to that, where you've got instructional materials that you can put up, where they've got software they can be doing, work that they can be doing on their own, then you can have like 3 groups going on that you're not monitoring. One's working on the software. You don't even have to be on with them. Another one's maybe doing a recorded session that you sent, which I'll show you an example of. And then you're working in a small group session that you're just getting them on, so they don't have to navigate between the breakout sessions for a small group for younger students. But we still want to work with them in that small group setting as much as possible. And for that, consistent communication, so they can hear and see you as much as possible. The other thing that research was showing in motivation that's highly correlated is collaboration, being able to work with their peers. It's highly motivating for a lot of students. So if we can set that up in the virtual setting, breakout sessions is a great way to do that, and other options for collaborative work, that's going to maintain engagement for students as well. Those collaborative sessions are highly motivating for students. So again, be thinking about ways that you can translate that, especially as they get older. They're more autonomous, and they can do that group work with other students. Of course, you could facilitate and have other people help you facilitate for those younger students as well. Let's go to tip 4, ample praise. So this one might seem a little bit disconnected. What does this have to do with a successful virtual classroom? It is profoundly correlated. So the evidence is very clear that praise results, ample praise, consistent praise, genuine praise, but translates into increased productivity, increased performance, as opposed to criticism. There's actually, speaking of evidence out there, there's actually a show on Netflix called 100 Humans, in case you need one more thing to watch on Netflix right now. It's it's kind of an interesting show where they've taken 100 people randomly selected, doing a variety, but they're basically asking questions that we all have and running experiments to see what the data is showing. There is one episode on there, episode 5, it's the pain and pleasure episode, where they actually researched the effect of praise versus criticism. They bring in these individuals, and they bring in this party performer who can spin plates on a stick. And he teaches this group that's been randomly selected how to do that. They give them time to practice. Then they come in to perform for this facilitator and 2 other facilitators of the study. And the party planner that did this trick, he had to pull randomly whether he was going to give praise or criticism so that it was unbiased. And what was interesting is that often when he would pull the criticism one, it was for people who were amazing at it, really, really good. And all he did was give them criticism. And then he would pull the praise option. And it was interesting because, again, sometimes it correlated with ones that were terrible, and yet he would just give them praise. So after that experiment of giving them praise or criticism randomly, they sent them back out to practice again and come back in and perform one more time. And they scored them. They had a scoring set based on certain criteria of how their performance went. So when they brought them back in, what was so interesting in the evidence is that those who received praise, their scores jumped by over 50% increase. Even those ones that couldn't do it before nailed it. Those that were solid before and received just criticism, their performance dropped dramatically. So this is a really cool thing if you want to watch that. It was a really powerful light bulb moment for me. I knew the evidence with this, but it was so incredibly important. So for me to make this connection here, because what happens is we're really seeing all the things that are falling apart and aren't working. And it's really easy for us to give criticism, like you're not getting online, you're not doing this, for the parents as well, for ourselves. Also, by the way, research has shown that, just take a minute for you, that self-compassion yields lasting behavior change. Self-punishment or criticism does not. So showing up for a lot of grace for ourselves, for our teachers, for our students, for our parents, those parents as well, is going to be important. And to be able to break that down and praise their effort. Hey, you know what? You logged on today, not just the scores. So we want to talk about that growth mindset, where that's so important to focus on what they're putting in and what they're doing. You know what? You got 2 of your 3 assignments done today. That's fantastic. Great job. The colleague that I was speaking about earlier, the school psychologist, Paul Black, that's taught a lot in this virtual arena, he talked about how that consistent communication was so important for him to maintain that relationship. And some of those relationships that were not as great in the classroom, because he got that one-on-one time even improved. But he also loved that he would call the parents, usually the ones that only heard negative things about their student, and do, a good news moment with them. And what that would do for their engagement, their willingness to keep working, was profound. And we know that with anecdotal evidence, but also we know that from detailed evidence that this can be incredibly powerful. So just to review quickly those 4 tips. So be mindful of setting clear expectations, what that looks like. Be realistic. Make sure our platforms are simple to use. A variety of options. Be adaptable. Be able to change when we need to. And consistent communication. Going and setting challenging goals. Making sure that we're zooming out and that we understand the big picture of what we're doing, and helping our students do that as well. And then really diving in with clear details of specifically how we're going to do that effectively to meet those larger goals. Facilitating engagement, making sure that we're maintaining that with students through lots of opportunities for feedback, checking in with them, those small group breakout sessions, and keeping a consistent schedule. And finally, that ample praise, making sure that we're consistently working with students and parents and providing that praise as often as we can, and to ourselves as well. So now let's go to the second objective, where I want to go into guidelines for effective virtual reading instruction specifically. There's only 2. I want to be simple today in what I'm covering. This first one is critical, though. We want to maintain our instructional design, especially for a structured literacy approach, which what Reading Horizons is. If you're using and teaching structured literacy or evidence-based reading instruction in your classroom, we want to maintain that instructional design as much as possible. So in a structured literacy approach, we have the elements that are the inner circle, what we should be teaching, but then we have the principles, how we should be teaching that in the outer circle. And those are just as important, if not more important. So how that goes into a sound instructional design that helps take that cognitive load from the teacher, working with that student collaboratively, and then to that independent practice, is that gradual release of responsibility, or that I do, we do, you do approach. This is a sound instructional design that we want to maintain even in the virtual setting. And what tends to get left off in this model is the we do in a virtual setting. So we want to think about, going back to that engagement, how can we be collaborative? How can we engage with those students consistently for that guided practice portion? I'm going to show you an example of how we can do that. So to give you a model, I'm going to share one that we use within Reading Horizons. How we fit into that instructional design is what we call the daily core 4. We start with a review. Because we're structured literacy, we're cumulative. So the review is almost like an informal formative assessment to make sure they've got that previous skill before we move on to the next. Then we go into the instruction, very quick, about 10 minutes, that direct, precise, clear instruction. Then we want to go into the guided practice. One of the main things we do in that time is dictation, which is a multisensory aspect that I'll show how that can be even done virtually, and then transfer. The transfer, we're going to extend that time more, but that can happen more independently. The initial kind of guided practice transfer is about 5 minutes, and then that could extend from there. So that I do section for younger students. So in the traditional classroom, we can do whole group, we can do small group. The nice thing, again, if you've got a curriculum that allows you to have a software component as too, then you've got a really blended approach that can be direct instruction and software informing each other for those more effective results. That's ideal. Now, we just talked about in a virtual setting, that whole class, pretty challenging. So to maintain engagement, we're finding it's better to keep that small group instruction and letting them be autonomous on some other things, and then rotating through those groups like you would in a classroom, just doing that in a virtual setting. So the I Do instruction can come in a variety of ways. The nice thing about software is you want to make sure that it's instructional and not just a babysitter, right? So that goes back to the purpose. You know, what am I doing here? I want to make sure that that goes to my bigger purpose of my students meeting their goals that I have for them as far as reading goes. For older students, when we're talking about these skills in particular, these word identification, decoding skills that may be lacking, they're going to be their gaps are going to be very unique to them. So the instruction would always be small group and one-on-one anyway, even a traditional classroom. So we'll just maintain that in a virtual setting, which is nice. We would do that with that small group online, and then with the software, they can work on that with some autonomy there. In the guided practice portion, we would go to dictation. Dictation is where we bring in a multisensory component where they're hearing it, saying it, writing it, reading it. Now, sometimes there's some misinformation about what multisensory means and what the science is showing is most effective. Sometimes we get hung up on, oh, well, we have to use a sound tray, or we have to use, you know, something like that. And the science doesn't back that up as much. There's not clear evidence on that. So we don't have to worry about trying to translate that over. What the evidence does show about the benefit of multisensory instruction is the multisensory piece of language, so that they're going through all of the processing systems in language, the sensory input, motor output. So they're hearing it, saying it, writing it, and reading it in a time-sensitive fashion. For any age of student, that's critical to make those connections, and that can still be maintained in a virtual setting. The last part of transfer, we always want to make sure that our instruction students have a variety of options to transfer. So going back to variety and options, transfer those skills to their reading and writing. Especially in this type of instruction, the end goal is always how can they transfer that and automatize that transfer as well, which means we've got to give them ample opportunities to do so at the word level, sentence level. Again, how can what we have in the classroom be repurposed? Can we put it up online? Is the curriculum we're using able to offer that? And is that opportunity to transfer on the software as well? We want to have that same options for our older students, but we make sure that it's age appropriate and relevant to them. Again, it goes back to motivation. This is one of the challenging pieces when we're teaching students in those upper grades that are struggling with reading, when we try to go back and fill those gaps on those foundational reading skills. If what we're providing for them is not age appropriate, not relevant to them, they're going to not be motivated to engage with us. We want to make sure that that's happening as well. So I want to show you how we can transfer this to a virtual setting. So one of our educators, and we're actually going to be doing a webinar tomorrow based on another webinar when I presented this before, we asked what people would like to know more about, and they want to have a walkthrough of how to use a couple of these resources that we share. We're going to be doing a webinar tomorrow morning. We can share that link as well, where a couple educators are going through ClassKick and Google Classroom and how to use that for your instruction. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough here about how I was able to take that instructional design and plug it into this platform. So I'm going to be teaching the CK spelling lesson, really cool spelling lesson we teach, how to know to spell with C or K. Has to do with the vowels that follow. K takes the vowels I and E, and C takes the other three, A, O, and U. So we're going to teach that. And I'm going to use this application online to do that for my students. Super easy. ClassKick is one of the easiest I found. I didn't have to watch a tutorial video. I was able to create my lesson very, very quickly. And there's all sorts of features. I can record my voice so they can just click on a button and hear it. I can record a video of myself in the instruction that you'll see. I used another application called Loom. That's similar to Zoom, but it's more for pre-recorded, and you can move the bubble of where your face is, where you want it for the students, which is really powerful. And then they're able to record themselves so I can hear them reading for my progress monitoring. That's really powerful. So let me show you how we do this. So you come in here to classkick.com. You can create a new assignment. In the upper right-hand corner, you click on that plus sign, and you can just create a new blank assignment. You can pull from a file. I created one Daily Core 4 on the CK spelling skill. Once I created these Core 4 in that instructional design, then I'm able to assign that to my students. I put them in a class role. It creates a code for those in my class role that then I send to my students in any platform that we're using. And then they click on that link and they put in their name, because it's going to create an assignment unique to them so I can see their work. So now you're going to see the student side. We start with a review. We started with a game. Then they just click on it. Super simple platform, go into the instruction. I already linked it, so just watch this video very quickly of just a snippet of the instruction. Go over a new lesson today called Spelling with C and K. You're going to learn a very cool spelling rule to know how to spell with C or K, since they both make the same sound. So let's look at this sentence. Okay, so I haven't played that, but that was just a link that they were able to click on, and then they understand the instruction. They get that detailed instruction. Now we're going to go to guided practice with dictation that I already recorded. We're going to do some dictation practice. I'm going to say a word 2 times, you say it back 2 times, and you write it once with the text box, and then you can go back and use the pen to mark and prove your word. The first word. So lots of great features. They can write it in, they can mark it, all those things they need to do, and now transfer the initial activity. Record yourself reading the words in the top row. Then fill out the next few words with either C or K according to the CK spelling rule you just learned. Once you do that, record yourself reading those words, and then record yourself reading the sentences at the bottom of the transfer card. Okay, so this is kind of my guided practice section that helps them a little bit. And I know it's not live guided practice, but I'm still providing that support in this platform of ClassKick. Super easy. I was able to maintain that instructional design. I would extend the transfer with them, where I could pull up. The nice thing about program example like Reading Horizons is all of our text is digital as well. It's online. So I can pull that up with students. I can have them read to me. I can make sure they're checking their comprehension as well. And it can actually score it in here for me. They just record themselves by clicking on that mic, super easy, if they've got that capability. Again, if they don't at home, that may be where I adapt and I call them on the phone. Sometimes parents just use the phone and that's all they have access to, right? So there's ways around that we can do. But if they have access to a computer, then this is a great platform to be able to do as well. So let's go to that second. There's only these 2 for effective virtual instruction. So that first one is maintaining that instructional design. And that's important because I want to maintain that as much so that my progress monitoring is accurate. And we still want to make sure that my progress monitoring is regular and responsive. We want to make sure that I'm able to still provide that differentiated instruction based on my students' needs, giving them additional practice and application opportunities. That goes to when we're reevaluating our curriculum, is there a variety of options in this virtual setting in particular to be able to maintain that? And what can I do to provide extended transfer as well? I'll talk about a couple ways that we can provide that support for you, Reading Horizons specifically, but just whatever you're using in any subject area, it's good to be mindful and kind of look at that right now as to what's happening there. So progress monitoring, I'm not going to do a lot on right now. My colleague, Paul Black, that I mentioned, is actually going to be hosting a webinar on Friday covering progress monitoring in the virtual setting, and we can share that link with you if you would like. His audience is going to be more specifically focused to special education, but it's still applicable for any setting, any tier level, to understand kind of how we can do that still in this virtual arena that we find ourselves. So now let's go to the third objective. I want to go to resources available from Reading Horizons specifically. So we have a teacher portal or website page called Reading Horizons Accelerate. It's rhaccelerate.com, where we have all of our resources able to access digitally for you to use in your instruction in the traditional classroom or in a virtual classroom. We're used in virtual classrooms all over the nation, so we can turn this around very, very quickly to be able to do that. So let me show you some of the features within here that you're able to access now. So when you come into the dashboard, we actually have all of our instruction in PowerPoint, which is what I used in my lesson that you saw. So you can put it up and create those videos for students. And then when I click on lessons, I can get my lessons digitally in this platform, my lesson manual. So I can select the lesson that I'm working on. I select that. It's going to go through sequentially in that systematic fashion. I can go down into the lesson. It's going to follow that gradual release, that review, instruction, dictation, and transfer. And then, for example, on my materials will be linked there. So for that transfer activity that I did with that whole class transfer card that we do for fluency practice, it's right there. I click on it. I was able to just take a screenshot, or I can download it and move it over into like ClassKick, for example. All these resources are here for you, videos on how to teach these skills. All your downloads are there for you to print up. You can send those to students. We're even creating packets for you to send home for students who don't have digital access right now, community page to ask questions, and training. Now, this is one thing that's purchased, but we do have online training for educators, for teachers, and how to teach this. Really detailed 6 modules for the 6 chapters, how to do the software, all of those resources right there free on readinghorizonsaccelerate.com. Then we have the software. We're going to talk about the offering that we have for the software. We are offering our software free till the end of the school year for you to be able to access and use with your students. And it's instructional, it's diagnostic, it's adaptive, it's prescriptive. It's going to provide that differentiated instruction and practice. And you can take that data to drive what you're doing with your students. This is Reading Horizons Discovery. This is our K-3 program. It is super engaging for students teaching those foundational skills. It's leveled to their grade level, their needs based on those assessments. They get to go through that explicit instruction. They're building vocabulary word walls, pronunciation tools, motivation factors like games. All of that is available to them, and the decodable text is there as well. Reading Horizons Elevate is our software for 4th through 12th grade. Actually, we're using adult settings as well. Also diagnostic, adaptive, prescriptive for what they need, differentiated instruction and practice, age appropriate, relevant, transfer materials, all of those resources that we're offering to close that gap for those students who are still needing these skills too. This is a time we're using summer school settings all the time, students doing it from home, where we can close that gap in a short amount of time. On average, we see a 2+ reading grade level gain in about 40 to 60 hours of going through Elevate specifically to close that reading gap for students. So those are available. And Mike, your account executive, is going to talk about that at the end. The last resource that I want to share with you is just our website. We're providing a lot of resources there just free for anybody, whether you use our program or not, where you can come in and look at some resources that we have available there. If you're interested about how to get started, we have videos there. We're providing webinars that are just general information as well during this time. We're also providing specific webinars every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on how to use our software. Our implementation coaches are doing live lessons from all the chapters Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday that you can use or have your students join live or send out to you. They're recorded. You can send it out to your students to try to help take that load off. We know you're creating so much, and if we can help provide some of that for you, we want to be able to do that. So next steps, just to wrap up before I turn it back to Mike, as we just kind of review our objectives today. Some of those takeaways, hopefully to think about, review those tools that you have and what's able to be repurposed. What do we need to reevaluate and maybe bring in differently as we move forward in this for a long time, to be able to have that possibility just to evaluate, see where you're at, what can be repurposed, what do we need to create, and using those 4 tips to help make that successful. Then effective virtual reading instruction. Ensure that as much as possible you maintain your instructional design. So this is a good thing. We were talking about expectations. Am I able to maintain that instructional design with my students? What resources do I have to use that to maintain that? Remember, tomorrow we're doing a webinar on specific walkthroughs of platforms and what to do also if they don't have digital access. We're going to be doing that tomorrow as well. Where you can see some of those resources as you're evaluating this. And the last thing, you can access available resources through Reading Horizons to help you during this time, be able to look at those and see what would be beneficial for you and your specific needs at your school or district. So what are those offerings that we're providing? We're providing free district consultation. So you can talk with Mike just about how to get set up virtually with just anything, but then even specifically how to get set up if you want to use Reading Horizons and get access to that software as well through the end of the school year for either Discovery or Elevate. So we want to do one last poll before I turn it back to Mike. I want to know what was valuable for you, your biggest takeaway today, so that we can see what we might still be able to provide for you moving forward. Was it the general tips? Was it the reading instruction specifically? Was it Reading Horizons resources, or was it everything? We'd like to hear what that was like for you. I'm going to pull up and look over here so I can see those results. And if there's more that we can do, and we're gonna go ahead and change you all to panelists in a second so we can have more of a direct verbal conversation in this setting. Thank you for those of you engaging in the chat today as well. Okay, great. So I'll give it just another second to see. I'm curious to see what some of your biggest takeaways were today. And if there's things on here that you want to know more of, we're going to be able to have you talk just get that verbal response in just a second about what you'd like to know. The general tips, good again, and everything. Awesome. Good. That's great to see. If there's things that you would like to know more of that we can provide, you can put that in the chat. If you're interested also, you can put in the chat about those other webinars that I've mentioned that we're providing. One we did yesterday already, we can send you the link to once that's created, and the one tomorrow and the one Friday. We've got quite a few going on this week. So questions, we're going to go into that question section. Where we can move you to a panelist. There's a couple of things here. So you can email Mike after, mike.gardner@readinghorizons.com for additional questions. And then you can schedule a meeting with Mike where you can talk specifics about what this would look like to get it set up now, later, whatever that looks like, or how we can support you at this time for your specific school or district. And this, you can't click on it from here, but we'll drop it in the chat. Where we can drop that link in and you could click it there. You can take a picture of it. It's just a little bit.ly that you can go in and make a schedule a meeting right now with Mike. But we're going to go ahead now, I think still, and promote you all to panelists so that you can ask questions. You can drop some right now in the chat that I can answer, or we'll just make it so that you can ask those directly. So Mike, I'll turn it back to you as we're transitioning to that.
Thank you, Chantel. And thank you all for your questions and your feedback this morning. Just a few things quickly, and then we'll open this up and give everyone a chance to ask some questions. Feel free to email me with any questions you have. Like Chantel offered, we would love to allow you to use this software and instruction at no charge for the remainder of the school year. But I also wanted to mention, I'm going to send an email. We're going to send you your PD certificate, a link to the recording of today's webinar, and then a PDF version of Chantel's presentation as well. So you will be getting that email. So, but for those of you that would like to stay on and ask questions and continue the discussion, we'll go ahead and make that change and allow everyone to participate. There is a mute button on the bottom left side of the screen, so you can mute and unmute yourself during this portion. And that way we can eliminate some of the ambient noise that we're discussing that. So what questions do you have?
You can put them in the chat or just throw it out there.
Chantel, someone asked a question on the Q&A part.
Okay.
Are there any resources for 5 to 8?
Ages 5 to 8, I'm assuming?
Probably.
Yes, so they just put it in the chat.
They just put it in the...
Sorry, grades 5 to 8.
Oh, grades 5 to 8, absolutely. Yeah, so specifically, do you mean for what we're doing from instruction or general resources? Help me clarify that.
So I'm an English language arts teacher.
Okay.
And I love the resources that you have for K through 3 as far as that idea of seeing where they are, helping them get ahead, because right now, unfortunately, we're getting behind. You know,
Right.
I want to make sure that we keep moving our kids in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And I'm concerned that if we don't keep pushing them in reading, that when we come back to school next school year and start looking at our benchmark results and things, that we're going to see that they've gone down instead of up. And I'm wondering if you have any good resources for the online instruction to help with that in particular.
Absolutely. So our Elevate program is for grades 4 through 12. And so let me talk about a couple of things about its purpose. So it is teaching those foundational skills, those decoding skills that if they have not been automatized for those students in upper grades, they could have issues. So if you know their decoding skills are solid, we still have the vocabulary tool in the library. The library is over 330 passages, Lexiled from 1st grade to 12th grade, in 33 different genres or categories or areas of interest for that motivation factor of interest level. So you could even use the software just to have them practice in the vocabulary and the library to kind of maintain those skills. More often than not, though, and I will say in my experience in when my students were below level at all, you know, even from a small gap to a really large gap, really behind, decoding was a factor on some level, whether it was, those higher level decoding skills, those more advanced patterns. And what's so nice about this is they're able to go in and with those initial assessments that are going to be adaptive and prescriptive, it'll determine what level they need of every skill instruction. And if they score high enough on the decoding, like if decoding isn't an issue, then it will just unlock the library for them and they can just practice their comprehension skills there. So those are some options that we have with the software that are all adaptive based on their results in the initial assessments to target where they're at, provide instruction, practice reinforcement based on their need. Did that answer that sufficiently?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. What other questions do you have? And even, now about what would be valuable for you at this point? What would be next steps what would you like to know more about? You can throw that out in the chat as well for us to look at, or just tell us verbally.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself in the bottom left corner and just ask a question if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your voice. It feels so far, right? Speaking of, today, I know when we do it in a webinar setting, it still feels a little bit distant. So
it's good to have that social interaction, right? We're not
absolutely right now. There's one coming in on the chat. Mike or someone, can you see that?
Yes, it says, how do you access this if you're just an individual class? Does it have to be a district-wide? We would like to offer it to more classrooms, but we'd be happy to get your class set up using it as well. And we would just like to offer it to the school or even district-wide.
I was asked that question on the last webinar, and it's the reason we're trying to keep it more that from is because we want to provide it for more, like Mike said, to have more people have access to it. Logistically, it's the same for us to set it up, so we might as well set up more classes from the back end in there, so we can do that. But if you've got other teachers in your school that would benefit, we just let them know or share this with your administrator as well. Okay, more in chat.
Another one from Sarah says, I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade ELA, and for next steps, we're using ebooks. I'm wondering if you have any research about how ebooks read differently online versus a hard copy of a book.
They're finding even that the research, even if students listen to an audiobook, they're getting the information that's still helpful from building those higher language comprehension skills of the background knowledge and vocabulary, all of that. It's not forcing them to access or apply decoding skills, but it can still even connect those because they're seeing those words in connection with the orthography and the phonology at the same time, which can help with orthographic mapping. So it can come in a variety of ways. My son, for example, who has dyslexia, it's about how can I get them the information? What's the purpose here? We're even suggesting, it was even suggested last night on the webinar to how to support, for parents to support their student at this time, their child at this time, is the same accommodations. If they need to have that read to them, read it to them. It's about getting them that information, keeping them motivated, helping them feel successful. So it is as long as they're able to access it and it's not overly complex and they're still able to engage with it and you can check that accountability, there's not a lot of evidence of it being negative one way or the other. Because they're still able to work with that print, using an option where if you want to check, where they can record themselves and play it back, if you want to check that just to make sure that those skills are applied, or have those comprehension checks, in those upper grades, things like that. So as long as those features are available, you have some sort of accountability if they read it, then it's fine. There's not hard evidence one way or the other.
That was a good question.
Great question. Other one in there? I think another one came in, Mike, or?
Just a comment. Sarah said thank you for that answer.
Oh, you're welcome. You're so welcome. And if there's questions that come later, we can definitely answer those later.
See
Anything
any other
else?
questions? If another question comes up, please email me, and we'll respond to those. And if any of you are interested in offering this or using this with your students, actually, here's another question. I have
Okay.
a few students with dyslexia. Will you have more sessions about students with dyslexia?
We've talked about that. We have one. I wonder, I'm trying to think if we've got one set up for special ed specifically. Let me double check. If not, that's something that we've talked about and can definitely look at doing, especially with, you know, that being my arena. I'd be happy to jump on and provide that. I think that would be beneficial. It is possible. I have tutored even with the original Orton Gillingham online. It's harder because there's no digital component. There's different things that I adapted and did. It's possible. It's definitely going to need to be one-on-one and staying with that consistency of that instructional design. You know, anything Orton Gillingham based for dyslexia is a very structured lesson, and that's going to be your main point, is to keeping that structure and that engagement with them, and employing all the modalities as much as possible. So if they have digital capability, it's definitely doable. Just things that you would have like cards and stuff in front of you, you would put up online, and we have all of that available with Reading Horizons that you can do as well. But it is something, if you have specific questions, you could let me know. My email is just chantel@readinghorizons.com if you have something dyslexia specific, and you can talk to Mike about that and he can put you in contact with me. I'm also on Twitter at Reading Chantel, where I post a lot of information and resources as well, for just reading and connections to great research and stuff as well. So those are options on dyslexia I talk about too, but if you want something specific, let us know and we can talk about providing that too. But the main thing is kind of what I talked about today, maintaining their instructional design. OG can be done virtually. And if you can have manipulators and things for them there, we're providing those as well. With packets and different interaction we can do. You can maintain that really, really well for those individuals with dyslexia.
That's a good question. And Sarah, we would love to do one. I do have a plan to set up one next week for dyslexia and the science of reading, to talk more about the foundational reading skills. And so I can email you information on those, and we'd be happy to include you in that. And if there are any other requests for topics, let us know, because we are going to do a series on helpful discussions.
Along that same line, the idea of just differentiating instructions. I have a lot of ELLs in my class. I have a lot of students with IEPs. And I feel like the small groups that I used to be able to do, where I could just pull them aside, I could just pull those kids and work with them. And now in my lessons, I have 1 hour. I'm supposed to present all of the information to all of the kids. And then it's like, okay, good luck, ELLs. Hope you got it. I'm really struggling with that part of it. And with Zoom, I think a lot of my ELLs aren't even logging in, because they're like, okay, I don't even understand what she's saying. I'm not getting the readings.
Well, so that's an expectation thing from your powers that be or whatever, in that, like, is that something you have the flexibility to go back and say, I really need to provide specialized lessons in 30-minute segments. I'll create 3 of them and get them logged in at different times, or send them at different times. Like, is that an option for you, or is that even an option?
As of right now, it's not. That doesn't mean that's not something I can't present to them. They do have their own separate classes where they are meeting with their ELL teacher, they are meeting with their SPED teacher.
Okay.
But for my specific content, I feel like I'm just teaching to a whole group. And that's not how my kids work. That's not, and I'm the breakout sessions are great, but again, that gives me like 5 minutes with each group. That's not, I'm trying to wrap my head around how I can make this work long term for
Right.
my ELLs and my ESE kids.
Really, I mean, the only suggestion is to be able to go back and have a discussion about, I've got to be able to have options with them, small group. And even if you do like a general instruction, but then you create 3 different practice where you break it down and pre-record it on ClassKick, if they can at some point in the day get onto that at a separate time, because that they can get into at any time. You could differentiate it within something like ClassKick, because you can set them up on different rosters based on your grouping. And then what you're doing, you're giving more detailed instruction at their level and specific practice to their level. We're going to be going through ClassKick more tomorrow in that webinar. So that might be an option if they can access it later, where you could provide that general instruction, kind of like we do in the traditional classroom, general instruction, and then dive deeper in your small group. That just may not be live at this point. You could still have those conversations about preferably having it live, but that might be one option. I don't know how that feels to you.
Is that something, because I'm not going to be able to be in the webinar tomorrow, that you are going to be able to send us the video for that though?
Sure, absolutely. Yep, we'll record that one tomorrow too.
Yeah, I'll be teaching during that particular one.
Yep.
Just watch for the email and then register for that. That way, if you're not able to attend, you'll still get a copy of the video or a link to the video. But
Okay.
that'll be in the email that you'll get.
Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Any other questions? We'll give you a couple of minutes. I would love to answer any questions that you still have.
Did another one come in?
So Dave posted a link for tomorrow's webinar.
Oh, good.
In the Zoom chat.
Okay. Okay, now I can finally access my chat. Sometimes with my setup, I can't always. I can see it now a little bit.
Okay, good.